welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, the only podcast that's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. My name is Isaac Edlund. I am your host tonight, and with me, I have a very special guest. It is John Viilanass from the... Okay, did I say your name wrong? Did I?
Yeah, that's okay, because nobody gets it right on the first try. Viilanass.
Okay, yes. I'm going to start that over because I don't want to pronounce.
Don't worry about it. No, just keep rolling. It's fine. Everybody gets it wrong.
Well, our gracious guest is John Viilanass from the Two Geek Soup podcast and another podcast that he was just telling me about on our Patreon exclusive portion of the episode. You can check out the Infinity Bros Patreon for unedited episodes and all the goodies that everybody loves to hear. So make sure you go check that out. But John, welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
Isaac, I'm really thrilled. We've kind of interacted on Twitter a little bit, and it's always fun. And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, very excited to discuss the MCU among other things on our Patreon. Obviously, both share a love for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and with the episodes that I've listened to of Two Geek Soup, you guys do as well. Like on discuss a lot of MCU content on your podcast.
Yeah, it's I didn't really expect it to be as much of an MCU podcast as it kind of has turned out to be. But we talk about other stuff too, because the main thing of Two Geek Soup is looking at geek culture from a Christian perspective. And so there's a lot to mine in the MCU, and superhero stories in general are so full of these like big epic story structures that kind of mirror the great, drama of redemption, right? Because you start out with like a good status quo, and then there's a fall, and then there is redemption through sacrifice and restoration. And that's sort of like the broad structure of so much of superhero stories, and so we love to dig into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about you, what you do, and your podcast. And you mentioned on the Patreon as well that you are currently helping co-host another podcast as well. So tell us about that one too. Tell us all about yourself.
Well, so in my everyday life, I drive a concrete truck. So like that's far from the most interesting thing about me. But the thing that is great about that is that it allows me to listen to like tons and tons of audiobooks and podcasts, like just all day long.
Go.
And so, I just read, I listened to a book about, the challenges of like creating and what they call alignment in AI, like basically keeping AI from like just totally going off the rails.
Okay,
that's
a good thing to have a book about, I think.
Yeah. So. And I just listen to tons of podcasts, just current events stuff, and theology and history and film criticism and music and but yeah, I've been doing Two Geek Soup for a while. There was sort of a long hiatus, and we got back into it a little bit last year, and I've kind of been in a bit of a lull now as well. But I'm hoping to get some new stuff out soon. I sort of run mostly Two Geek Soup, and then I have a sort of a rotating cast of guest hosts that join me there frequently. And the other project that I am working on right now is called The Narrow Pod Between Pages. And if any of your listeners are aware of Patrick Rothfuss and the Kingkiller Chronicle, then they probably would enjoy listening to that show. But it's a little bit too niche for me to want to go into explaining very much more of it than that right now.
So you mentioned it's like a high fantasy type?
Yeah, the Kingkiller Chronicle, you could call it high fantasy. Sort of, kind of, not really, because The King Killer Chronicle is great because it plays around with your expectations of the tropes of the fantasy genre. And so in that sense, it's a little bit hard to nail down. But what it unequivocally is, oh, okay, sorry, I need to stop because I hate it when people do the what it is no, that's stupid, and I hate myself for
Well, here's
getting
how you
into
can
it.
change that phrase.
Yes,
You could
here
say
we go.
what it is to you.
Well, no, because I don't want it to be that subjective. It
Oh,
is unequivocally a masterfully and beautifully written piece of fiction, and in my mind, one of the greatest fantasy novels of the last 20 years.
wow.
And so anyone who is even remotely interested in fantasy should absolutely read it. And anyone who enjoys really beautiful prose should also read it, even if they don't like fantasy.
All right. Well, there you go. There's your plug for The Name of the Wind. Is that what it's?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the first book. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm getting these names right. So, Name of the Wind, and something that I am also going to check out because I mentioned to John on the Patreon exclusive portion that I'm kind of trying to get back into reading a little bit. I've been doing a lot more comic book reading, but like for the past, basically since college, I've been like, yeah, reading's dumb. I'm not doing this. So, trying to get back into it a little bit and dip my toes back into that world. So, writing that down for future reference.
Well, I think on the list of things that ought to be read, pretty high is what we want to talk about, right?
Absolutely. We are going to be talking about Dune Part 2 later on in this podcast. I do have one thing that I want to get to first, but yeah, that's the main focus of this podcast. Just released this week, and man, there have been some rave reviews on the interwebs about this movie. Like I've seen people say that this is already going to be the movie of 2024, that it's going to sweep the Oscars, that it is their personal favorite movie of all time. Have seen multiple people rank it 10 out of 10 on social feeds. And this is all social feed stuff, so take it with a grain of salt. But still, the fact that people are going on and on about how great this movie is certainly warrants a closer look at it. So that's what we're going to do today. But first, we're going to talk about the Infinity Gauntlet.
Are you a heel or a baby face? If you could make any flavor Cheez-It, what would it be? Is it pronounced Grogu or Groku? If Keanu Reeves isn't in the movie, can it be star-studded? It's time for the Infinity Gauntlet, here on the Infinity Bros podcast.
So John, the Infinity Gauntlet is a segment that we put all through our guests through. And what we do is we take a question from each of the Infinity Bros and we basically grill you with it. So,
oh, sweet. Okay, I love it.
Yeah, it's basically kind of a get to know you segment for our guests. And I guess we'll see if you can survive the Infinity Gauntlet. So, so here we go. This one is from Infinity Bro Jarrett. He says, if you can change the ending to any movie, what would it be?
Ooh, change the ending of a movie. All right, I'm trying to think of like, what's a movie whose ending really just sucked and like was a detriment to the rest of the film. I'm drawing a blank on like some of the more like esoteric and like weird movies that I didn't get, and because I feel like something like that would be an answer. Mm-hmm. I tend to try and take things on their own terms and appreciate it for what it is and not what I wish it would be. Except for Secret Invasion. We talked about that at length in the Patreon
we
segment.
could just forget that ever happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's one that I would just like snap right out of existence. You don't need to change the ending. It just needs to be gone entirely.
Yeah, gone. Exactly.
I don't love in Superman Returns that like the kid is actually his son, and like it and he like lifts the piano up and everything. Like Superman Returns has some weaknesses to it, and I think I'd like to adjust some of that.
Interesting. Picking an old
Because
classic there.
I like Brandon Routh as Superman. I think he's a great Chris Reeves stand-in, and I love that they used the John Williams theme in
True.
Superman Returns.
Yeah. Okay.
We'd say that we could
Right.
tweak Superman Returns a little bit. It could be a better movie.
All right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many movies that, like, if you just change one or two things, it could probably elevate that movie. And that's one of those movies that, like, yeah, it wasn't the worst movie in the world, but, like, I don't remember much about that movie at all. It was kind of forgettable.
Yeah.
So if you just are able to tweak a few things, maybe you make that a great movie. Who knows? So there you go. All right. Number 2 question here is from Infinity Robbie. He asks, you get the chance to talk with one director or writer from your favorite movie or comic book. Who do you pick and why?
Oh. Let's see. Director or writer?
I'll even expand that to writer of books as well. He specifically said comic books, but, like, you're a book guy, so if you have a writer,
I'm also very much a comic book guy.
Right? Yeah.
I follow him on Twitter, and I always like what he has. He's got a really entertaining presence on Twitter. J. Michael Straczynski.
Okay.
It has been a sort of a kind of a powerhouse of a writer for a long time. Going back to the 90s and Babylon 5 and I'm sure something else before that, but he's written tons of great comics too. And not even like mainstream stuff, but like some indie stuff that he's written is really, really cool. There's sort of like a Heroes-esque thing that he wrote called Rising Stars, which was really cool. And he wrote one of my very, very favorite runs on Spider-Man in the early 2000s, where Spider-Man encounters the first of the inheritors that he ever meets, called Morlun, and they're these bad guys who like feed on like totemic power,
right?
And he realizes that like perhaps the spider that gave him his power did not empower him because it was irradiated, but maybe it was seeking him out already before. That it's not a mutated radioactive spider that gave him the powers. It was seeking him out because he was like destined to be this like spider totem, and it's just a great run, and it's super fun, and it was part of the timeline where like his relationship with Mary Jane was really rocky, and that made for interesting drama there as well. So yeah, Mike Straczynski is would be my pick. He's pretty cool. I'd love to chat with him.
One last question here for you. This is from me, and this is basically based on our conversation on the Patreon. So here you go. If Kevin Feige handpicked you to be his successor, what would the future of the MCU look like?
Oh, it'd be bleak. I'm not as smart as Kevin Feige. Something that he has been so masterful about is taking the characters from the comics and staying pretty true to the core of who they are, and drawing inspiration from the big events of the last 15 years or so, and sort of playing fast and loose with the details. And if it were up to me, I'd love to try and just continue in that vein, and also not make quite as many junky TV shows.
But yeah, there you go. If you had to pick like one major like comic event to adapt to the MCU, what would it
Yeah.
be?
I was, and we mentioned Secret Invasion in passing. Secret Invasion deserves
Oh,
an
a
actual,
true
a real actual
adaptation,
adaptation.
right?
Yeah, I would have made Phase 4 Secret Invasion. Yep.
Such a big missed opportunity with the
Yeah.
Secret Invasion show that we got. Oof, sad, sad day. But with that, you have finished the Infinity Gauntlet and passed with flying colors. So
Huzzah!
welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, John. You made it. All right, so that's it for our Infinity Gauntlet segment. Next, we're going to dive into Dune Part 2. So on the Infinity Bros podcast, we have a special rating system.
Here on the Infinity Bros podcast, everything is ranked from a 0 to 6 point scale. 0 meaning horrible, and 6 meaning absolutely excellent. If all of the Infinity Bros rank something a 6, it gets an Infinity Step.
Dune Part 2, the sequel to Dune Part 1. Shocker. Second of a two-part adaptation of the 1965 novel Dune by Frank Herbert follows Paul Atreides as he unites with the Fremen people of the desert planet Arrakis to wage war against House Harkonnen. Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Zendaya, Charlotte Rampling, and Javier Bardem reprised their roles from the first film, with Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, Leah Seydoux, and Sohila Yacoub joining the ensemble cast. This released on March 1st, 2024. As of recording, we are recording on March 2nd, so it is fresh. I saw it last night. John, you said you saw it, was it Wednesday night or Thursday night?
On Thursday night, yeah, opening
Thursday
night.
Which
It was hilarious
opening
because there were only 3 people in the whole theater.
I was just gonna mention that, like, opening night nowadays is such a weird thing because, like, back in the day, like, yeah, I'm assuming that you're like about the same age as me. Like, back in the day, we'd have people like lining up because
Yeah.
you couldn't pick your seats. You just had
Right.
to show up when the movie started. And I mean, I remember the one that sticks in my mind the most is The Dark Knight,
Okay,
midnight
sure.
showing,
Yeah.
and it was packed. They didn't let anybody in the theater until like 10 minutes before the movie started, I think. And there was lines, and I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. So like,
Yeah.
so it's not a huge theater, but the line was going out the door. Like there were people waiting outside,
Yeah.
which is like pretty ridiculous for that time.
Yeah, I remember the theater being. I don't remember if I went to see the midnight show on opening night, but definitely it was a crowded theater when I went to see The Dark Knight. The show that I remember, the movie that I remember waiting in line for the midnight show. I'm pretty sure I went to see Revenge of the Sith on the midnight show, and it was funny because they had some technical difficulties with it, and it was taking a long time for them to start the movie, and the natives were getting a little restless, and there were a bunch of people cosplaying, and at one point one nerd like lit up his lightsaber and started waving it in the air, and like a bunch of other nerds also lit up their lightsabers and waved them in the air, and it was kind of hilarious.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, the whole theater experience in general is just not what it used to be. The last packed out theater I went to, shockingly, was actually for Barbie last year.
Yeah.
There was a weird cultural phenomenon around Barbenheimer.
Uh-huh.
Everybody was going to those movies, but besides those, I don't think I've been in a packed theater like since COVID. Like it's just, I don't know, it's not common anymore.
Yeah. When I did go to see Barbie, and I think the theater was pretty full. I don't really remember, but yeah, it was. Yeah, that whole phenomenon was kind of bizarre, but
crazy.
But it was nice that people sort of finally sort of had regained that enough of a sense of normalcy that they're like,
Right.
yeah, I can go to the theater and it's gonna be okay.
Right. Yeah. And I think it was awesome that neither of those movies were like superhero movies, because that's like been the big thing for the past, I don't know, 10 years probably. Like everybody shows up to go to a superhero movie, right? But
Yeah.
it's cool that that was around two movies that just had a lot of just general buzz. Like they weren't like a part of a universe or anything. They're just good old fashioned like blockbuster movies, and people went to see them. So that was pretty awesome. And
yeah,
the fact
my brother bought me the book that Oppenheimer is based on, and I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting. And the fact that one of those movies was an R-rated historical drama that almost made $1 billion.
That's crazy.
Just looking back at that, I was like, wow, that is amazing. But it doesn't always happen like that anymore. So hoping that Dune Part 2 kind of catches a little bit of that craze, because I mean that's really what it comes down to, is that people on the street, on the internet, talking about what a great time they had going to see that movie. So we'll see if I mean Dune Part 2 is going to be the biggest opening of this year for sure, but it'll be interesting to see where it lines up on the big scope of box office grossing movies, and maybe even comparison to Dune Part 1, because Part 1 when did that come out? That was like 2021, right?
Was it that long ago?
Let me look. Yeah, 2021, which actually was like right in the middle of COVID. So that probably didn't do well in the box office.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. A lot of interesting things about Dune Part 2. And like I mentioned before, we get a huge conglomerate of returning cast members, which was the best part about the first movie, was the star-studded cast. So the fact that we get all these names back and add a bunch more. And I was not aware that Christopher Walken was going to be in this movie. So when he showed up on screen, I was like, whoa, okay.
Christopher Walken is a really interesting actor to me, because he's so quirky that, like, for me, it's sometimes a little bit tough to take him really seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I feel like he dialed that down a little bit in this. Like, he was not in full, like, more cowbell mode in this movie. And it's the better for it.
Right.
I just saw him in I watched Severance here recently.
Man, that show was so good.
And he's like way out into Quirkland in Severance. But I liked him in this more than I like, because he's good, right? He's a really entertaining actor, but like
he's almost got this like enigma around him that's like hard to like penetrate when you're watching a movie with him in it. Like there's like just something about him.
His mannerisms are so specific, and so considered that it's hard for me to not just see Christopher Walken when I'm watching him, right?
Yeah, right.
And when you're in a movie that has a lot of like drama and is supposed to be kind of serious, then you don't want that in your actors. That's kind of it's kind of the same reason, and for a completely different set of factors. I kind of feel the same way about Will Smith. Like you kind of can never get away from the Will Smith-ness of Will Smith. And, as long as all he has to do is like be kind of like charming and cool, then that's fine. But in the more dramatic moments of a film like The Pursuit of Happiness, or what's the other like super serious one that he was in where he like ends up committing suicide by jellyfish?
Oh, that like is ringing a bell, but I don't.
Whatever, that one.
Yeah.
Like in those ones, he's less Will Smith.
Right.
And it's to the benefit of those movies. Right. And so
So
Yeah.
I've got a scale for you. So if Christopher
Yes.
Walken is in the middle, Will Smith is more on the like down to earth side of that scale. The other side, extreme version of
Jeff
that.
Goldblum.
Well, actually, that's a really good one too. But I was going to say Nicolas Cage. Because you watch a Nicolas Cage movie, you're like, this is Nicolas Cage. I don't know about this, but then he pulls out a good performance every once in a while, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
Yeah, I guess so. Like Nicolas Cage. See, I don't know if I would put Nicolas Cage in that same category, honestly, for myself, because he's nearly always unhinged a little bit, but I feel like it's not always in the same kind of way,
right?
You know, like Nicolas Cage's, I don't know, charm, if you will, is that like you kind of never really know what you're going to get.
Yep.
and that's not the same thing that I'm talking about with Christopher Walken or Will Smith or Jeff Goldblum. Like with them, like you kind of know exactly what you're gonna get. A la also the idiot from Saturday Night Live, Happy Gilmore and Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler is the same character in almost all of his movies.
Yes, he is.
Except for the much better ones where he is not Adam Sandler.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
True. Yeah.
So this is kind of what I'm talking about.
Right.
But yeah, Nicolas Cage is different than that. Like he's always a little bit crazy and you never really know what you're going to get. And that's kind of what makes Nicolas Cage great.
All right.
So are we talking about Dune? Is that what we're doing here?
I guess. Maybe we should get back to that, I suppose. All right. But first of all, I do want to mention that John has read Dune. I have not. So just a slight background on that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to give just a quick non-spoiler review. And before we dive into, revealing everything about this movie, if you want to get a little snippet of like, hey, what this movie is about, you can listen up to that point and then pause this podcast, go watch Dune Part 2, and then come back and listen to the rest. So, John, quick, 60-second, non-spoiler review of Dune Part 2.
The thing that really struck me when I was walking out of the theater, I thought, more than any movie that I think I've seen at all recently, Dune 2 did a just incredible job of being consistently creating its world. My suspension of disbelief was not challenged at all at any point through the movie. All of the visual effects had their proper mass and weight. And I just believed the story, And that's a really impressive feat when you set it next to stuff that you look at and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, CGI. I didn't think CGI at any point throughout the entire movie. It's just beautifully rendered. It is a visually stunning movie, and it has a lot of heft, and that is in keeping with its source material.
So, yay or nay? Did you like it?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clear that up. So
two gauntleted thumbs up.
There you go, perfect. Yeah, I am on the same page in a different sense. I loved it as well. Coming from Dune Part 1, which, I say Part 1, it's just called Dune. Right. But I was not a huge fan of that movie. I had not seen the previous Dune, not read the books. It was, cinema-wise, it was a great movie. Yeah. But it just felt long to me, and it was a lot of exposition, and that's okay. Yeah. It still wasn't a bad movie, and I did not dislike it. But it didn't stick out to me as this is fantastic. I am going to grab hold of this and I can't wait for Dune Part 2 to come out. Dune Part 2 came out and I was like, oh, okay, cool. It's another one that I'll probably see when it comes to streaming. Lo and behold, my wife says she wants to go see Dune Part 2 and I was taken aback because she doesn't normally go see movies with me. And I was like, okay, like,
Mhm.
why do you want to go to Dune Part 2? And she said that she has to support Zendaya. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting reason to want to watch this movie, but I'm taking every opportunity that we have to go and see this.
That's a fascinating statement to be making. Like, okay, all right, well,
Right? I know.
whatever.
I promise you, I was as shocked as you were just there right now when she said that. I was like, oh, okay then. Well, I guess we're going to Dune Part 2. So
I mean, I guess I'd rather support Zendaya by watching Dune Part 2 than by going to watch like the weird polyamorous tennis movie that's coming out with her up soon.
and
So
yeah, she's in like Euphoria and some other stuff like that too. So yeah, I'm with you on that. But yeah, I was like, oh yeah, Dune was fun. It was cool. You know, it had the vibes of like the big sci-fi fantasy epic. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we'll get more of this in this one for sure. And it delivered big time. I
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
will say it. I'm not like gonna go overboard and be like, this is now my favorite fantasy franchise. I like this better than Star Wars and Star Trek
Yeah,
and all that
no.
stuff. But cinematically, this movie is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it was an experience watching it in the theater. And I would encourage anybody that's teetering on if they want to go in the theater versus wait for it in streaming. This is a movie that you are going to want to go see in theaters. It is very impressive.
Yeah, like the nearest IMAX screen to me is pretty far away. So like I don't think I probably will go to do that. But like I've seen like ads from the cast talking about like how it's shot in IMAX and it should be seen in IMAX, and like I can see the it's a strong case to be made
Yeah.
that you should avail yourself of that
Right.
opportunity if you can.
Absolutely. And the first, I'd say like even the first 20 to 30 minutes of the movie, the sound effects just blow your socks off. And that was in a regular theater. So
Yeah.
in an IMAX, whew, can't even imagine. I'm sure it would be just absolutely a blast to watch in IMAX. So if I get a chance, I might, which is saying something because I didn't even see Dune in theaters at all. So the fact that I would go see Dune Part 2 twice, that's a pretty big step up for me. Very much loved it. Definitely worth seeing in theaters and would strongly recommend that. All right, now here's our official spoiler warning.
This is
Prepare yourself.
an Infinity Bros
Prepare yourself.
spoiler warning.
You have
Yeah,
been
Shannon.
warned. Yep, we're diving into spoilers of Dune Part 2. The first thing I want to ask you is, you have read the books, and have you seen, I didn't ask you this before, but have you seen the old like 80s Dune?
I did watch the old one. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
But I did watch it, and it was hard at the time to do it justice.
Mm-hmm. With the technology.
And so there are some fascinating things that they pulled off with it that I think are cool. I actually kind of dig the personal shields that they have. In the old movie, they were visualized really blocky. It was like sort of I don't know, they don't really have it in Tron, but it's literally like translucent, like polygons, actual
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
like blocks of this like force field armor around your limbs and extremities and everything. And so that was actually kind of cool. But like in general, it was a little bit too staid. It wasn't dynamic enough. And that's something where these new movies definitely are much better. Yeah, the old one wasn't amazing. There was also a Sci-Fi Channel adaptation of several of the books.
Interesting. Okay, I did not know that.
Yep. That came out in like the the early 2000s, I want
So
to
is
say.
that like a series?
Yes, yeah, a
Okay,
mini series,
gotcha,
like several mini series. So
gotcha.
there's
Wow. Okay,
Dune, and then
cool.
Dune Messiah, and
So
Children
out
of
of
Dune.
all of the adaptations, what did you, I mean, obviously cinematically we already mentioned like this is a masterpiece and obviously is much improved from those adaptations, but
Yeah.
and from the book, how are the differences in the adaptation of Dune Part 2, and did you dislike some of those aspects, or did they do a pretty good job of adapting the story?
So one of the things that has made Dune so difficult to adapt is how deep and how scientific its world building is. There's a like the Dune book goes pretty deeply into the detail of the ecology of the planet. And so when you sort of take that out, it leaves some weird holes. And so I think they did a pretty good job though of, I don't know, I guess just kind of not worrying about that as much.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
it's a good adaptation. And also, like, in full transparency, it's been a long time since I've read the books.
Mhm. True.
So there's a lot that I'm sure I'm forgetting about the books. Although one notable sort of element of the world that is completely absent from the movies is the Orange Catholic Bible. And it's not like recognizable as the Bible as we know it in any way. But it's sort of a collection of a lot of like religious wisdom from
Mhm.
Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and like all sorts of other made up stuff. But it kind of features prominently in the first book, and it's interesting that it's just like
They
completely
just,
omitted
yeah, left it out.
from the
Interesting.
movie. And it's not like a huge loss, but it was definitely a part of the it was a part of the world building of the books that sort of tied it to our sort of actual history, and
Hmm.
and set it specifically
Right.
in like our future.
Hmm.
Whereas the Dune movies, like, you don't necessarily watch that thinking like, this is set in our universe,
Right. Yeah.
you know
True.
so
Yeah, I did not get that like vibe at all that they were trying to portray our universe in the future type of thing. So that
yeah.
is interesting. I appreciate that. Yeah. So yeah, I think, I mean, like we already mentioned, cinematically, this is like probably going to do very well at the Oscars. Sound
Yeah,
effects
it
will
deserves
win.
to, for sure.
Uh, I mean, it's probably going to be in the best picture conversation. I don't. They always have a lot of these weird like indie type films in that conversation too. So like, it's hard to say that this is like a for sure winner of a best picture, but
Yeah.
it'll be in that conversation for sure. But yeah, I mean, the performances all were incredible. I don't think there was one performance in it that I was like not convinced of, that everybody did a
For
fantastic.
sure. Yeah.
My biggest one personally was Timothée Chalamet, because I've seen him in a few things and I'm just like, I don't really get the hype. Like he's fine. Like he's not a bad actor or anything, but I just was like, why is everybody so like crazy about this guy?
Because he's pretty.
He is pretty. You're right about that. But he proved that he can swing it with the big dogs in this one. Like he is phenomenal in this one. I absolutely loved his portrayal as Paul Atreides. He got me on the Atreides train. Like I love this guy now. So
Yeah, he's he definitely, he's convincing as like his hauntedness is convincing.
mhm, right.
He's carrying this burden, and he sort of conveys the weight of it,
Right.
like Elijah Wood in
Yeah,
in
you
like
just
Return
feel
of
it.
the King.
Right.
You feel
Mhm.
how how the ring is weighing him down, and you can feel how his visions of the future are really like plaguing him. And yeah, it's it's really interesting, and I don't know how much really into like sort of deep thematic stuff we want to go,
Go
but
for it, man.
the Dune series was written expressly as like a thought experiment about like Messiah figures, right?
Mm.
And Dune 2 is very explicit about how it is criticizing organized religion, and how it is, like, we use this to control, and the easiest people that we prey on are those who are fearful.
Right. Yeah, they
And
literally say that like word for word.
yeah, exactly, right. um so and when you have these people who believe, like, they will not countenance a challenge to that belief. When Chani is talking to Stilgar and says, like, this stuff is made up, like the Bene Gesserit made it up, and he's like, no, it's blasphemy. Like they just won't hear it.
Mhm.
And so, like, as a person of faith, like, that kind of stuff is always a little bit frustrating to me. And also, like, in the world in which we currently find ourselves, like, unfortunately, there are these elements of, oof, man, we're gonna like get in big trouble
Getting
here.
real deep.
There are elements of Christendom that have really lost a sense of curiosity, I think,
Yeah.
and that are not comfortable with mystery.
Mhm.
In there are swaths of the church that really like to have everything buttoned down and
Mhm.
like cleanly systematized,
Mhm.
and like
Have an explanation for everything.
yeah, and who look at the Bible and say, like, if I approach this with the correct interpretive metrics, and the right hermeneutics is the technical term, then
We're
I
gonna have
will
to put a glossary in our show notes here. Continue, sorry.
then then I will arrive at the proper interpretation. And you should hear the capital letters at the
Mhm.
beginning of each of those words right now, um, because this is what it means. And if you understand a little bit about the literary conventions that are present in the different genres that exist in the Bible, then you start to realize, like, like, the correct interpretation exists in far fewer cases than a lot of us are actually going to be comfortable with. And so, to get back to Dune, you know there's a degree to which I'm less frustrated by some of that critique as I have been at other times.
Have you read Dune Messiah as well? That's the second book, correct?
So so I read Dune, and
Okay.
then I watched the sci-fi adaptation of Messiah and Children of Dune, and then I read God Emperor and Chapter House Dune, which are
Okay.
the fifth and the fourth and fifth books in the series.
Got it.
And
Okay.
boy, did they get weird. Like, man, especially Chapter House Dune, like basically the premise of Chapter House Dune is it goes into the future quite a bit, and they clone Duncan, Idaho, and there's like a rival faction of the Bene Gesserit that are taking over the galaxy by, like, through sex, essentially. Like they're like send agents to suborn powerful people through the the sheer intensity of the sexual pleasure that they can give them, and it's
Oh my
really
gosh.
it's a little bit bizarre.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, were these books continue to be written by Frank Herbert, or did they have different authors?
So through Chapter House Dune, that was Frank Herbert. And
Okay.
then after that, you got a lot of prequel stuff that was co-authored by his son, Brian Herbert, and another science fiction author named Kevin J. Anderson, Kevin J. Anderson is a decent writer in his own regard, and has like a big epic sort of space opera series that's pretty cool called The Saga of Seven Sons. But I haven't actually read any of that other material because I'm given to understand that it's not great.
Okay. That's fair. Sometimes you got to take the plunge and watch that bad thing or read that bad thing. Other times, sometimes it's just not worth the time that you have to put into it. So
yeah, well, and at this point for me, so my one great literary regret is that I took the time to read the entire Wheel of Time series.
Really interesting.
There is some truly incredible fantasy, just moments of transcendent awesomeness in the Wheel of Time series, but on the whole, I found it to not be worth the investment.
So did you find that as you continued reading that it got less and less interesting to you, or
Yes.
or was it pretty good when you started and that's hooked you into it?
Yeah, because there are 13 books. Long about book, I think it's at the end of book 6, something just earth-shattering happens. And then book 7 is the lead up to that event, and then reaction to that event from the perspective of a bunch of secondary characters that you don't care about. And it does not move the overall story forward in the slightest.
Interesting.
And then that happens again later on, and you're just like, when will this be over? I've been reading these books for 2 years. Can we be done? So yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, there you go. There's your little plug for the Wheel of Time book series.
Your anti-plug. Don't read it.
Yeah, right. Oh, gosh.
For Wheel of Time.
Wait, are we talking about Dune?
I think we were at some point. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so I asked you about those books because I would assume that Denis Villeneuve, who is the director of Dune and Dune Part 2, I would assume that he's gonna at least make another one, Dune Messiah.
I'm given to understand that he wants to do Dune Messiah, and that's what he's got planned through. Okay. Yes.
So maybe that's it then for him, and he's like, we're gonna stop after that.
Sort of the overarching premise of the Dune books is that these Messiah figures are not always great, and that turns out, as the Dune books progress, that turns out to very much be the case. And it's not an especially happy story. He doesn't really basically what he ends up doing is I am going to become a terrible despot, and I'm going to spawn a dynasty of terrible despots so that we can conclusively demonstrate to humanity across the stars and across the eons that we must never create political structures that will ever again allow there to be such a terrible despot.
Gosh.
And Yeah. So it's a little bit bleak.
To say the least. Oh man, that's something, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll see how that ends up working out as like a tidy 3-part story
Right.
in a cinematic trilogy.
Yeah. We'll have to come back to that when Dune Messiah is announced and it eventually comes out. So
Yeah.
yeah, lots of interesting speculation to talk about, but I mean, in and of itself, Dune Part 2 was fantastic. You actually mentioned that you're a musician as well. Hans
Mhm.
Zimmer does an incredible
You know,
score.
I'm not always a huge fan of Hans Zimmer scores.
Okay.
Sometimes I find them to be like, okay, so for instance, the Hans Zimmer score for Man of Steel, I hate.
Really?
I actually
Okay.
hate because like Superman, and this is explicit in the movie, and I don't know how Zack Snyder figured it out as much because he's on record as not understanding why people like Superman, but somehow even he managed to grab on to this bit of Superman lore that the symbol on his chest is based on the Kryptonian glyph for hope. And Superman is a character that should make you feel hopeful and uplifted.
Yeah.
And we talked briefly in the Patreon segment about John Williams and the John Williams score. You just try to listen or even hum, if you
Mhm.
will, a couple bars of the Superman theme from the old Superman movies, and I defy you not to feel better, or like I defy you for that for a smile not to be charmed onto your face by the Superman, because like the music literally sings out to you, Superman, and like it's gonna be okay because
Yeah.
Superman is here, you
Yeah.
know, and the fact that the Hans Zimmer score for Man of Steel was so oppressive, and the theme, like the Superman theme in the Hans Zimmer score goes like this, goes like ba ba
Foreboding more
ba
so than hopeful. Right.
ba ba ba. Ah, come on! Like, let's have something with a little bit of life, can we?
Hmm.
And so I mean, the work that he did on the Dark Knight movies was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for something that's a little bit edgier and darker, like I think he works in that vein really well.
Hmm.
Um but okay, so sorry, let's get back to Dune again.
Back to Dune. Okay,
Back
here
to
we go.
Dune.
Back to Dune.
It was fantastic. Like it had this cool like tribal
Hmm.
vibe that really
Right.
works. It was exotic. It was mysterious, and it definitely, like, as the best movie scores do, it brought like a very particular kind of life into the movie, and it was fabulous.
Yeah, it honestly helps set the tone in that universe like so well.
Yeah.
It just pairs so well with that universe. It was phenomenal. Hans Zimmer, incredible score. We already mentioned the performances. I just wanted to mention quickly that the Harkonnen trio with Dave Bautista, Stellan Skarsgård, and what was the other? Austin Butler.
Yeah.
Those were some great choices for the villain or antagonist type casting. Just I
Yeah.
loved it. Dave Bautista, dude, is actually a pretty great actor. I
He is a
really have,
great actor.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
really appreciated him in a lot of different projects. I love how in this movie he just is turned into a coward. Like, and I don't remember the first one
Sure.
enough to really. He seemed like pretty hardcore in the first one.
Well, yeah, but as is always the case with cowards,
right,
he is exceptionally bold when the tide is in his favor, and he has the entire army at his back, and he's pounced on his prey with the element of surprise. But as soon as he actually encounters resistance that he can't overwhelm, he scurries away.
Well, that was a great part in that final confrontation when he just literally books it out of there and is like gonna leave.
Yeah.
And then Josh Brolin's character comes and confronts him. But yeah, that was I love that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Stellan Skarsgård, great as always. And Austin Butler, that guy he's gotta be maybe in the conversation to be nominated for like supporting actor.
Sure, that's an incredible performance.
Dude, he acted his butt off, and he was a intense and threatening villain.
Yeah, that's a scary villain. Like outside of a literal horror movie, I don't know about a villain that just like oozes menace.
Right.
More than he did.
Great set of antagonists. And we already talked about Christopher Walken. I mean, it works. Like he did a great job with this film. So, and they're honestly, now thinking about it, it was the perfect role for him because I don't think I could have seen him play anything else in this movie. He nails that like kind of hoity-toity emperor that, doesn't really dirty his boots. Things very well.
So I just watched. So speaking of classic sci-fi literature, I got through the Foundation series.
Oh, I've heard about that one. Yeah.
So it goes pretty far afield from the source material, which is hard not to do because the Foundation books are highly like episodic. They're actually a collection of like anthology stories from like back in ye olden days when there were science fiction magazines that like published short sci-fi stories. That's where Isaac Asimov originally published those stories, and so like the first couple Foundation books are actually just like a collection of those short stories. And so like the connective tissue is a little bit loose. And so if you're going to adapt it into like a television series, you have to take a pretty high amount of license with that.
Yeah.
But sorry, all of that is to get back to say that it's interesting to compare the Christopher Walken's Emperor character with the emperors that are present in the Foundation series, and there kind of is a little bit of a similar vibe, honestly, of like this unshakable sense that the universe will bend to my whims, right. and then of course what we all love to see is for that sense of security to be broken. And that was a great part of his performance in Dune too, when he realizes that like his play is over, like he's not in charge anymore.
It was a great performance. Honestly, that whole sequence, I actually want to talk about that sequence where, I mean, we get the final battle.
Yeah.
They are able to invade the like throne room or whatever. The fight between Paul Atreides and the Harkonnen dude. What was that Harkonnen guy? I forget.
Fade Routha.
Yeah. Whew, that fight was
okay. So in the history of cinema, there are several legendary fight scenes, right? And one of the best, sort of sword or bladed edged implement duels, of course, is found in The Princess Bride.
Yes. Love that one.
And the choreography of the Princess Bride's sword fight scene is masterful, but it's also you don't really sense it doesn't really convey a sense of danger because it's not intended to, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
it's supposed to be like a dance with swords.
Right. Exactly.
This thing is most decidedly not any sort of dance.
Not at all.
And that really it blew my mind as I was watching it. It's like, holy crap! Like this actually looks like they genuinely want to murder each other.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
it was intense.
That is probably one of the most convincing fight scenes that I can remember seeing. Like in some of the Bourne movies, it gets really brutal, and like I believe those fights.
Right.
Those are good. But like, when you talk about Star Wars, like the lightsaber fights, like those are so highly stylistic in their choreography that it's not brutal. And this was brutal.
It was brutal, big time. Yeah, I mean, we talked about on the Infinity Roast podcast a while back, kind of the lightsaber fight that you just mentioned. Like, there are a pretty wide variety of lightsaber fights in Star Wars that, like, you got, Obi-Wan versus Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. That's very, and these guys are master swordsmen.
Yeah.
So this is a like crazy, like tons of like choreography, like sword movements and all that stuff. And then you go to the sequel trilogy and you've got Rey and Kylo, which is a much different battle. But in that battle and also in Obi-Wan, the series with Anakin, Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan,
right? You
see the emotion in those fights more so than in and obviously there's emotion in the Obi-Wan Anakin one, but like there's this range of like, hey, we're focusing on the emotion in this fight, or we're focusing on the choreography in this fight. And this fight nailed it, like right in the middle. The emotion was intense. Cow. The choreography was incredible. It was just an overall best scene in the movie, in my opinion. I was on the edge of my seat through
that. Was a fabulous scene. The other scene that I really loved was the Fremen's assault on the on like I guess it was like the spice mining. Big facility thing.
Yep.
Because that more than anything is the scene that I think about when I said back at the beginning how like my sense of my suspension of disbelief was not challenged. And like and a lot of times when you have like this big sort of machine something that's obviously not real if you think about it.
Right. Yeah.
That's where you would normally like see the seams.
Well, and that's also speaks to the immersiveness of this movie. Just like you said, the suspension of disbelief, just like it wasn't there. Like I believed everything that happened in this movie.
Absolutely.
Even though, there's stuff that's incredible in it, did not take me out of the movie one bit.
Right.
So yeah, just I would say the only negative that I really even have about this movie is that there is, and this is not even, I struggle to even call it a negative because it's essential to the story, but there's a lot of exposition and dialogue, which again is not a bad thing. This is where the first one was not as interesting to me because almost the whole movie was exposition and dialogue.
There's a lot of setup in the first.
It's movie, good. It's good exposition and dialogue, but still needs to keep me engaged and interested, which it did in this movie. So again, not a knock, but like I still felt the length of this movie. Whereas like some movies, you're like Avengers Endgame, that went by in 10 minutes to me. And that was probably more so because I was so invested in the universe at that time, not because the movie was like the best movie of all time.
Yeah.
But I still felt the length in this, and not for any specific reason, but just still felt long. So
I felt the length of it because I started my showtime started at 8:10 and I was already tired because I'm an old man now. and
All right.
I did actually like slightly drift off
Mm.
for just a couple of moments, like in the middle, like as they were getting ready
Then
for
you
the
woke up
big
and
battle.
slapped yourself a
I was
couple
like,
of
"Brr, brr,
times.
brr." Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a long one.
It's a
Yeah,
long one, yeah.
it needs some endurance.
But and again, I don't think that's a huge knock. I think almost every moment of this movie was essential. Like I don't
Oh
think
yeah,
anything needs to be cut out to make it a tolerable length or anything like
right.
that. But yeah, you definitely need to like gear up and be like, all right, we're sitting down for this 3-hour movie here.
Yeah,
So that was my only like knock on it. But I love now going back. I want to go back and watch the first one to get all the exposition that I forgot about or missed in the first one. I wish I would have gotten a chance to watch it before leading up to this one, because that would have probably helped me understand what was going on again. I kind of like had to get a refresher in the first couple of minutes of the movie. I was like, who's this?
yeah.
What am I doing here? But yeah, now I want to go watch that because this movie was so good. It's driving me to go. I've had Dune the books on my list for a while, so there I'll get to those eventually. But
If you're kind of trying to get back into the swing of reading, I wouldn't start with Dune because
it's
it's
further down on my list, so we're good.
it is the science fiction of like the 50s and 60s and 70s. Like, it was a different kind of writing, really. Like, there's a lot of it it's more demanding of you as a reader. Like, it expects you to be kind of dialed in,
Mhm.
and I think it's frequently less interested in really entertaining you than in bringing you along for this thought experiment, because that's
Mhm.
what science fiction is. Really, science fiction is a
Right.
thought experiment,
Mhm.
and it takes like questions that we want to ask in our world, and it takes our world away from those questions, right? So we can kind of get at them in a different way, and so that we can think about them apart from the assumptions that we have about how our world works. That's what science fiction is for. So when you have these like elder statesmen of the science fiction genre, like Frank Herbert and like Isaac Asimov, they're sometimes less interested in entertaining you, and
Right.
so that means that you need to bring a certain discipline with
Mhm.
you when you're reading
Need to bring my notebook
that
with
stuff.
me to the theater, is what you're saying.
Well, the movie is definitely interested in entertaining you
Yeah,
more than the
yeah,
book is.
definitely.
I'm pretty comfortable saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it did a phenomenal job of that. So all we got left, I mean, we could probably continue to talk about this movie for a while, but I do want to start wrapping us up here. So, John, moment of truth here. What was your rating of Dune Part 2 on our 6-point Infinity Bros scale?
I struggle to find a way to ding it in any way. For me, there's no reason not to just go ahead and give it full marks. Like, I think it deserves to be a 6,
Yeah.
frankly. Yeah.
And that's totally fair, especially of a guy that's got some background on it, that you're into the sci-fi like genre as deep as you are. I think that's absolutely fair because of the length of it and because of just my lack of context in that universe.
Mm.
I'm not going to give it a 6, but it's still an absolutely incredible movie. I'd give it a 5.8 out of 6. Like just like a tiny bit with the
Mhm.
length on me. I do appreciate a good movie, number 1, and number 2, like sci-fi in general.
Mhm.
So this one hit those right on the head for sure, but I just don't think I am the one that it's like targeted to fully appreciate. In that sense, though, incredible movie, and I think it deserves all of the awards that it'll get at the Oscars this year, so, or next year, I guess, because this year's Oscars are from 2023. So
Right.
yeah, definitely incredible movie. Anything quick you want to mention that we haven't touched on before we kind of wrap things up here?
There were a couple of things that I kind of thought we might get to, but they won't be quick, and so I won't bring it up right now.
Next time
next
on Dude, you are a perfect guest to have on for this episode because you brought so much more knowledge to it than I or any of the Infinity Bros would have. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode, John.
It was very much my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are listening to this, thank you so much for supporting the Infinity Bros. You can catch us on any major podcast platform or on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, all of the things. And you can catch Robbie ripping MTG packs on Drip and selling those and shipping them off as well. So make sure you check that out. All of those links will be in the show notes. Wherever you're listening, however you're listening, thank you so much for making us a part of your podcast experience. We love you 3000. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Infinity Bros podcast. You can find the Infinity Bros on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube at the Infinity Bros. You can also check out our website at theinfinitybros.com for links, reviews, and sweet merch. Feel free to send listener feedback via social media or email at infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com.